Welcome to 1189, an online Bible commentary. My name is Tyler Marston, and today we're taking a look at Exodus chapter 20. Moses has made his way up Mount Sinai through terrifying cloud and fire and lightning and thunder, and he's meeting with the very presence of God himself. And this comes after God's proposal to Israel for a divine covenant agreement. And in this chapter, Moses gets a summarized list of the terms and conditions of that covenant agreement, what we call the Ten Commandments. Now, the Ten Commandments have gone on to, of course, become incredibly famous, which is a good thing, but sometimes they have been misconstrued here and there over the years. But they point to a path in life that directly counters the world's expectations and instructs us to love God and love our neighbors. Then the Lord spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. The Ten Commandments, and indeed the law itself, begins with a reminder of who God is, the Lord, the great I Am, who rescued the people from slavery. It's a priority to make sure we know which God we're talking about when we're reading all these commandments, and to know why we're worshiping that God as opposed to any other. This resulting law is not a set of generally ethical or moral legal codes. It extends directly from worship and obedience to the sovereign creator God of the cosmos. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. So the first two of the 10 command the people to not worship any other gods and to not replace God with any substitute. He is the only God with absolute sovereign power over every aspect of the universe, and he's also the only God with absolute genuine love and goodwill for his creation, meaning he's the only God worthy to be worshipped. His statements about visiting the iniquity of the fathers on their children can sometimes trip people up because it sounds unjust, unfair. But some scholars, like the Bible Project's Tim Mackey, say that this doesn't mean that God unjustly punishes children for the crimes of their fathers. That's evidenced by passages like Ezekiel 18. Instead, what it means is that God is eternally unchanging. If the parents sin, God will judge them accordingly. If the children follow their parents in sin, God will judge them accordingly. And if their children's children follow them in sin, God will judge them accordingly. The point is that this law doesn't expire. It won't fizzle out after a few generations. These covenant terms will still be applicable to generation after generation because of God's unchanging nature. It will be up to every individual descendant to decide whether or not to keep these laws. And for everyone who does keep these laws, they'll experience God's loving kindness, his mercy, his presence. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Now, most of the time, this is interpreted in Sunday school to mean don't say, oh my God, or don't use Jesus Christ as an expletive. But this is so much more than that. Taking God's name in vain means identifying with his name, claiming to be someone who follows him, and then not actually following him or his commandments. People will say today that they're Christians because they're conservative, or because they're liberal, or because they go to church, or because they're American, or Catholic, or Protestant. But none of those things actually identify you as a Christ follower. The real thing is believing in him and following his example. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall do labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or female servant, your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Remembering the Sabbath is another commandment that's unfortunately sometimes boiled down to going to church on Sunday. In truth, the Sabbath was, and really kind of still is, on Saturday, the seventh day of the week. And it was a weekly holiday for the Jews to rest from their work as God rested on the seventh day of creation. But it wasn't just a weekend like we have today. This was a countercultural abstinence from work, one day out of the week, that reminded the Jews that their true provision didn't come from their money or their income or their work. It came from God. Thus, they could only rest on the Sabbath if they trusted God. And so they used those days to worship Him for His provision. When Jesus rose from the dead on a Sunday, the first day of a new creation, Christ followers over time began meeting on Sundays for worship. And part of the point that they were making was that true rest, true trust in God's provision, true worship, an eternal Sabbath, that was all coming to fruition through the work of Christ and His church. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you. Honoring your father and your mother is not a command to obey every single word of theirs throughout your entire adult life, especially when they command you to do something that would be against God's rules. Presumed here is that your father and mother would be faithful Jewish citizens keeping God's laws, and honoring them would mean not doing anything to bring shame on their reputation in the community. And it ties back to those themes of ordinance and remembrance back in chapters 12 and 13, where these stories would be told from generation to generation so that Israelites of the future would remember what God had done for them in the past. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Now, these laws might look a lot more familiar to our modern context. Even if adultery and coveting aren't necessarily illegal things by United States legal code, they're still kind of recognized as bad things to do. And to us, it is self-evident, right? We shouldn't do these things because they hurt people. But these commands aren't derived from a utilitarian or a Kantian framework of philosophical ethics. These were commands to simply treat other people with respect and dignity. Why? Because they were made in the image of God. They're fellow humans. And so to murder or to steal or to lie or to covet or to commit adultery was to say, I deserve to be human and you don't. All the people perceived the thunder and the lightning flashes and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled at a distance. Then they said to Moses, Speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But let not God speak to us, or we will die. Moses said to the people, Do not be afraid, for God has come in order to test you, and in order that the fear of Him may remain with you, so that you may not sin. So the people stood at a distance while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. Now, as the people see all of this going on from a distance, they begin to be afraid. And it's kind of only natural when you see all this fire and lightning and cloud and thunder, and Moses walking so nonchalantly back and forth through it. However, Moses reassures the people. He says that seeing God's raw power like this should be a reminder not to sin against Him. Then the Lord said to Moses, Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, You yourselves have seen that I have spoken to you from heaven. You shall not make other gods besides me. Gods of silver or gods of gold, you shall not make for yourselves. You shall make an altar of earth for me, and you shall sacrifice on it your burnt offerings and your peace offerings, your sheep and your oxen. In every place where I cause my name to be remembered, I will come to you and bless you. If you make an altar of stone for me, you shall not build it of cut stones, for if you wield your tool on it, you will profane it. And you shall not go up by steps to my altar, so that your nakedness will not be exposed on it. God ends with a few more instructions for Moses to repeat. First is another explicit command to stay away from idols, followed by an instruction to build an altar to remember this moment. That altar and all the other ones the Israelites would build on their journey through the wilderness would be where they would make their burnt offerings and sacrifices. God says that when they're building an altar, to be sure to use raw, uncut stones, in direct contrast to the cut bricks that the Israelites were forced to make in Egypt. The point is that this is a covenant, not slavery. Israel can walk away at any moment. and they will many times throughout the course of the story. The result will be judgment until they begin to walk according to the covenant again, at which point there will be forgiveness and loving kindness and mercy from a powerful, sovereign God. The Ten Commandments are extremely famous, and for good reason. Nevertheless, we should continue to find shocking truth in them when we read them today. They should challenge us to be more committed to God and more committed to His image bearers. It's a high standard, and we won't be perfect at keeping them. But through humility and through Jesus' Spirit in us, we can begin to live out the truths behind these commandments every day. Thanks for watching 1189. I hope you have a good day, and God bless.